If you mess up, I have a backup fiancé. He laughed, like I was nothing more than a disposable plaything. The words cut deeper than I expected. The room froze. Every eye was on me. Friends, strangers, even distant relatives were watching, curious to see my reaction. Some smirked, some whispered, but I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I smiled faintly and calmly replied, "Then it's good I never fail." A subtle pause followed. Disbelief flashed across his face. The laughter that had been loud and arrogant moments ago faded into silence. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, whispers that carried the weight of judgment, expectation, and, most importantly, doubt. That night, I left quietly. No dramatic exit, no shouting, just the calm, controlled pace of someone who had been underestimated one too many times. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 27, ambitious, intelligent, and for most of my life, underestimated by people who believed wealth, influence, and status gave them the right to decide my worth. I grew up in a household where appearances were everything. Image mattered more than reality, and opinion often outweighed truth. Every action, every failure, even the smallest misstep was scrutinized and exaggerated, often to humiliate rather than guide. My parents were masters at control. They believed love could be conditional, measured by obedience, success, and conformity. And if I ever questioned them or sought independence, they had an arsenal of judgment, ridicule, and manipulation ready. That evening wasn't the first time I had been humiliated in public, but it was the first time I realized just how coldly people could weaponize relationships for their amusement. Their words weren't just meant to wound, they were meant to assert dominance. I spent years watching people with privilege manipulate narratives to maintain control. Observing them taught me something critical. The loudest voice doesn't always win, but preparation, strategy, and patience can quietly dismantle even the most confident bully. From a young age, I developed a different kind of armor. While others honed charisma, I honed patience. While my peers sought approval, I built skill. I learned that confidence, when backed by action, is far more dangerous than anger or rage. I started small. Academic achievements, personal projects, even minor competitions became my private arenas of victory. Each success, unnoticed or unpraised, strengthened my resolve. Each setback, misjudgment, or insult became fuel. By the time I reached my mid-20s, I had built a network of mentors, advisors, and allies who understood the real Ethan Miller, not the backup fiancé threat he had tossed at me that night. They saw potential, they saw determination, and most importantly, they saw truth. But that calm, steady climb wasn't enough to erase years of manipulation and doubt. I needed a stage. A moment where the world, not just my inner circle, would recognize the real me. A moment where my parents, the very people who had tried to control and define my life, would have no words left to twist the narrative. So I prepared. Months of meticulous work followed. Projects, ideas, networking. Every interaction, every email, every conversation became a step toward a moment they could not anticipate. I moved with precision, avoiding unnecessary confrontation, never revealing my ultimate goal. My silence became my shield. My skill became my weapon. And yet, I didn't allow bitterness to consume me. I learned early on that revenge isn't about anger. It's about justice, about reclaiming your narrative, and about showing strength in a way that leaves the world and your detractors speechless. That night, after the backup fiancé remark, I lay awake thinking about power, control, and truth. I thought about all the times my words had been dismissed. I thought about all the opportunities denied, all the doors slammed in my face. I thought about every insult, every whispered rumor, every carefully constructed lie my parents used to define me, and I made a choice. I would rise, not loudly, not angrily, but inevitably. By the next morning, I began the first phase of my plan. Small, almost invisible steps that would accumulate over time. I began documenting everything, not for confrontation, but for proof. I built systems to track achievements, correspondence, and misrepresentations, everything that could validate my life and work when the world needed to see it. I also rebuilt my professional identity quietly. New city, new connections, anonymous reputation building. Every project executed with precision and excellence. No one knew it was me, but everyone would eventually. And through it all, I kept my composure. The calm that night wasn't just for show. It was practice. It was training. It was the first real step toward proving to everyone, especially him, that I was never replaceable. The threat of a backup fiancé wasn't humiliation. It was a preview. A preview of the challenge I was destined to overcome. And in my mind, I smiled quietly. One day, when they least expected it, the world would see exactly who Ethan Miller was. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose sharper than any anger could give me. The words backup fiancé had been meant to humiliate me, to reduce me to a temporary option, a replaceable entity in someone else's story. But I didn't take them as an insult. I took them as a challenge. I was done being underestimated, done being dismissed, done letting others dictate the narrative of my life. I moved quietly at first. No grand announcements, no dramatic gestures. I registered under a different name in a new city. Small apartment, rented desk space, minimal contact with anyone from my past. I kept a low profile. The world would not notice me yet, but I was building. Every day, every hour, every choice was deliberate. I revisited the skills my parents had always dismissed: negotiation, public speaking, and technical projects I had been passionate about. I worked relentlessly, often into the early hours, pushing every skill to its edge. Every failure became a lesson. Every minor victory became motivation. At the same time, my grandmother, the one person who had always seen my potential, was a silent partner in my plan. "Ethan," she said one evening, voice calm and steady, "do not rush the world. Let them misjudge you. Let them underestimate. The moment will come when your work speaks louder than their words ever could." Her advice became my guiding principle. I understood then that revenge isn't about shouting louder than someone else. It's about being undeniable when the time comes. I began building my professional reputation piece by piece. First, small projects under anonymous branding, consultancies, freelance work, research collaborations, nothing flashy, nothing that would alert my parents. But every step was a stone laid toward a future they couldn't touch. Slowly, clients began noticing the results. The quality, consistency, and professionalism spoke louder than any resume or family connection. Meanwhile, my parents continued their campaign in their world of social circles and influence. "Ethan is unreliable," they told anyone who asked. "You don't want to work with him," they warned employers. "He can't manage responsibility," they whispered to friends and acquaintances. Each rumor, each calculated lie, fueled me silently. I never reacted publicly. I didn't need to. Their own arrogance blinded them to my slow rise. Months passed. I had no need for validation. Yet the subtle victories began stacking up. One investor reached out after seeing my work. Then another. Small recognition led to bigger projects, bigger clients, and more credibility. The son they had called a backup option was quietly becoming irreplaceable in his field. One evening, I received an invitation to a prestigious business networking event under a different identity. I could have declined, wary of exposure, but I knew this was part of the game. I would attend, observe, strategize, not to confront them yet, but to understand the world I was gradually entering. At the event, whispers of my work had already started circulating. People were impressed by the projects I had quietly completed. They spoke of innovation, professionalism, and foresight, and no one knew it was Ethan Miller, the same person my parents had tried to destroy. I started to see the cracks in their control. Employers who had once rejected me began asking for collaboration. Colleagues who had doubted me now sought advice. And my parents? Their lies could no longer keep up with reality. I realized that true power lies not in words, but in proof, consistency, and timing. Every small victory, no matter how unnoticed, was moving me closer to the moment when the world and my parents would have no choice but to see the real me. The real turning point came when I secured my first major client, a project worth 6 figures. The same type of contract my parents had told me I'd never handle. The same type of achievement they claimed I was unfit for. I signed the contract quietly, celebrated in solitude, and planned my next move. Every step was deliberate, every achievement calculated to build toward the inevitable public revelation. I often reflected on that night of humiliation, the backup fiancé remark. I remembered the laughter, the smirks, the expectation that I would fail, and I smiled, quietly, knowing that every small victory was a step closer to the moment where I would no longer be underestimated, mocked, or dismissed. By the end of the year, I had established a reputation that could not be ignored. I had gained respect, recognition, and credibility, all quietly, without confrontation, without exposure. And all the while, my parents continued their campaign, oblivious to the reality. The son they thought they could replace had become unstoppable. I learned something crucial. Patience, preparation, and silent persistence can overturn years of lies and control. True revenge isn't about shouting or confrontation. It's about being unshakable when the world finally sees you. And I knew the moment was coming. The moment when my parents and everyone who doubted me would witness the full measure of my strength, skill, and undeniable success. The night had finally arrived. Months of quiet preparation, sleepless nights, and meticulous planning had led to this moment. I, Ethan Miller, stood backstage at one of the country's most prestigious business awards ceremonies, ready to be recognized not for my family name, not for someone else's legacy, but for my work, my skill, and my perseverance. The stage lights were bright, the camera lenses countless, and the audience in the grand hall hushed with anticipation. Meanwhile, miles away, my parents were hosting a private gala in their mansion. They were the proud, self-assured Miller couple, confident that their son, the backup in their eyes, was still struggling, still failing, still nothing. Little did they know, the boy they had underestimated, the son they had mocked, was moments away from silently rewriting the narrative they had tried to control for years. The announcer's voice boomed through the hall. And now, the National Innovation Award goes to Ethan Miller. The audience erupted in applause. Cameras pivoted, flashing. I walked on stage, head held high, every step calculated, every movement precise. Confidence radiated not from arrogance, but from quiet assurance. Back home, my parents were glued to the live feed. Their wine glasses paused mid-air, their smiles faltered. And then, shock. The man they thought they could dismiss, the son they believed could easily be replaced, was center stage, commanding attention, glowing under the lights, every inch a figure of calm authority. I stepped up to the microphone. For years, I began, my voice steady, controlled. I was called a failure, untrustworthy, and incapable not by strangers, but by my own family. A hush fell over the audience. Cameras zoomed in. Viewers leaned forward. They spread lies, tried to destroy my career, and tried to manipulate the people around me. But I persevered. The applause that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. Every achievement I had quietly stacked over the months, the awards, the clients, the recognition was now in the spotlight, and my parents could do nothing. I continued, not with anger, but with quiet precision. This award isn't just for me. It's proof that truth, hard work, and preparation can overcome every lie, every attempt to diminish someone. My grandmother, seated discreetly in the audience, gave me a small, approving nod. Years of planning, of patience, of silent preparation had brought us here. The live camera cut to my parents, their faces frozen in disbelief, a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and an unspoken realization that they had lost control. The laughter that once dismissed me now had no place. The whispers that once belittled me now echoed hollowly in empty halls of their own making. After the ceremony, reporters swarmed. Messages, calls, and emails poured in. Colleagues who had doubted me, Investors who had ignored me, even friends who had quietly assumed I'd fail, all reached out with congratulations and admiration. And my parents? They were left speechless. Every lie, every manipulation, every word they had spread about me had been silently dismantled by proof, skill, and perseverance. Later that night, when I returned to my small apartment, I allowed myself a rare smile. It wasn't victory over them, yet it was a confirmation of the path I had chosen. Every sleepless night, every project done in silence, every minor victory had brought me to this moment, public recognition they could not deny. And then came the inevitable message. 4 words that I had anticipated for months. "We need to talk." It was from my father. I didn't panic. I didn't rush. I knew the conversation would happen on my terms, because now the narrative had shifted. The world had seen me for who I truly was. Capable, prepared, and unstoppable. That night, I reflected on everything. The humiliation, the laughter, the threats, the whispers. They had all been fuel for something bigger. I realized that revenge wasn't about confrontation, it was about preparation, patience, and quiet inevitability. And I knew deep down, this was only the beginning. The real triumph, the one where my parents would fully face the consequences of their arrogance and manipulation, was still to come. The day after the live broadcast, the world had already spoken. Headlines read, "Ethan Miller, from underestimated son to national innovator." The son they called a failure just proved them wrong. But inside the Miller mansion, the story was very different. My parents were pacing, attempting to compose themselves for appearances, but their faces betrayed everything: shock, disbelief, and an unfamiliar vulnerability. For years, they had controlled narratives, silenced opinions, and manipulated perceptions. And now, for the first time, they were powerless. I didn't reach out to them immediately. I let the silence stretch, let them stew in the world's recognition of my work. It was satisfying in a quiet, deliberate way, proof that patience and preparation are more powerful than any immediate retaliation. But I wasn't alone in this journey. My grandmother, the one who had quietly guided me for years, now stepped in to ensure the final act unfolded flawlessly. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm and steady, "they think they are in control. Soon, they will learn that every lie, every attempt to undermine you, has been documented. It will all come to light." And it did. Over the next few weeks, I slowly began exposing the truth. Not recklessly, not with anger, but strategically. Every email, every phone call, every manipulation from my parents was quietly compiled into a dossier that would leave them defenseless. Every lie they had spread about me, about my integrity, my competence, my character, was systematically disproven by the evidence, my work, and public acknowledgement. Meanwhile, my parents were flailing. They attempted to control damage, but every move they made only revealed their insecurity. Colleagues who had once trusted their words now questioned them. Clients who had been warned against me began reaching out to me directly. Their influence crumbled quietly, step by step, with each factual revelation. One afternoon, my father called me. "Ethan, we need to discuss this," he said, voice small, almost fearful. "You've embarrassed us, and the family reputation. We can fix this." I listened calmly. "There's nothing to fix," I said. "The truth doesn't need fixing." Every plea they made, every attempt at justification, fell flat. No anger, no shouting, no arguments were needed. The evidence, the public recognition, and my preparation spoke louder than anything they could say. During this period, I also consolidated my professional achievements. I expanded my business, established high-profile partnerships, and became a recognized name in my field. The projects I had quietly nurtured for months finally bore fruit, and the recognition was undeniable. And all the while, my parents remained in the background, powerless to intervene. Their attempts to insult or belittle me were irrelevant. They had underestimated the power of strategic patience and silent determination. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. A public event where my parents would be present. A charity gala where they intended to showcase influence and status. I arrived quietly, dressed sharply, composed, and commanding attention without demanding it. The room went quiet as people recognized me. Whispers spread. "Isn't that Ethan Miller?" Eyes turned toward my parents, and in that moment, it became painfully clear to them and everyone around that the son they had tried to erase was not only alive, but thriving beyond their control. I caught my grandmother's eye across the room. She smiled faintly, a knowing look that said everything. The plan had succeeded. Years of patience, subtle guidance, and meticulous preparation had led to this undeniable, silent triumph. By the end of the night, the verdict was clear. My career was unstoppable. My reputation was untouchable. My parents had no leverage left, no narrative to control, no power over me. And I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't always require confrontation or drama. It requires strategy, patience, and letting the world recognize the truth at the right time. I had done exactly that, and my parents, who had once laughed at me, were now powerless witnesses to my rise. That night, I reflected on the journey, from humiliation and doubt to quiet preparation, from small victories to public recognition, from being underestimated to being unstoppable. Every insult, every lie, every threat they had thrown my way had become fuel for this exact moment, and I had one final step left before the journey was complete. The moment where the last piece of control would slip from their hands, leaving them with nothing but the truth staring back at them. The night of the final ceremony arrived, quiet yet monumental. I, Ethan Miller, walked into the grand hall with calm precision. The audience buzzed with anticipation. Journalists and cameras recording every moment. This wasn't just an award night, it was the stage for truth to triumph over lies, for years of manipulation and humiliation to finally be answered with undeniable proof. Back at home, my parents were already nervous, glued to the live stream. The smug confidence that had once allowed them to insult me, call me unreliable, and laugh at my existence was gone. Now, they were forced to watch the son they had tried to erase command the attention of a nation. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Innovation Excellence Award goes to Ethan Miller." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. I strode onto the stage, composed and confident, every step measured, every gesture calm. There was no need for anger, no need for confrontation, just presence. I looked out at the audience and began to speak. For years, I was called a failure, a liar, a thief, not by strangers, but by those who were supposed to love me most. The room grew silent. Millions were watching. They tried to ruin my career, destroy my reputation, and silence my voice. But the truth always finds a way. I paused, letting the words sink in. The cameras panned, capturing the disbelief on the faces of people who had once doubted me. And then on the giant screens, the emails, the evidence, the documented lies my parents had spread were subtly revealed. Nothing flashy, nothing vindictive, just facts. The audience reacted with shock and admiration. Reporters whispered, taking notes. Colleagues who had ignored me in the past now sought interviews and partnerships. And in the back of the room, my parents were frozen. The power they had clung to for decades, the influence they had wielded like a weapon, crumbled silently before them. I continued calmly. This award is proof that patience, preparation, and truth can overcome even the cruelest lies. It is a reminder that no one can define your worth but yourself. I could see my grandmother in the audience. She smiled faintly, proud but quiet. She had been the architect behind this silent victory, and now, finally, the world could see the results. After the ceremony, the messages poured in. Congratulations, requests for collaborations, and opportunities I had once only dreamed of. The people who had